Hi, everybody. This is Donnie Winchell again. Um, this is another in the series of our videos to help you get started in the wine business on the right foot to become successful after lots of attention to detail. And hopefully some of the information on these videos is helping toward that goal. I will remind everyone that this is not to be construed as legal advice. It's an overview of the things you need to think about before you begin. This is a reflection of 20 or 25 years worth of experience in getting wineries moving forward. As in all cases, if you have questions, consult with your attorney, consult with liquor control, other experts as you move forward. This piece is a little bit about permitting and labels. Down the road, we're going to do a much more detailed reporting video, but this one is what the things you need to look at as you begin. Okay, the Ohio industry, as all of the other wine industries, beer, spirits, all the alcohol industries in the country are primarily regulated by the Department of Treasury, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Trade Bureau. We call them the TTB. Before you begin, you must have a federal application to produce wine on your premises. It is your starting point. It is the organization that allows you the ability to legally make and sell wine. All of your forms are noted on the first line, the ttb.gov/wine/forms. You are looking for a basic federal permit, and the link is there in front of you with a PDF. In your planning process, allow at least 6 weeks. Typically, they are a little faster than that, but not always. So you need to allow 6 weeks. First of all, if you've made some mistakes and you want to have some assistance in correcting those mistakes, this will give you plenty of time to do it. The instructions are relatively clear, but you will need your organizational documents, in other words, your legal entity definition. You'll need to have the names of all of the partners that have more than 5% ownership. You need to have clear diagrams of your property and building layout with all of the details. You'll need to have a trade name, and I will share with you it's important that you research that ahead of time. Years ago, there was a big debate over Shenandoah Valley in California and Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. TTB will not issue a permit if your brand name is not independent, it is not free and clear of other conflicts. There are also some definitions of things that you're not allowed to use, which we'll get into later. You're going to need to have a background check. You're going to have fingerprints. Sometimes that takes several weeks, sometimes several months. They want to make sure that we're not a bunch of bootleggers. If you need help, there was a fellow who ran the TTB office for the Midwest for years. He is now based in California, and he does a little bit of consulting. I would certainly download all of the forms, read through them carefully, plow through them as many as you can, and fill them out if you can. If you need assistance, give us a holler and we'll provide the contact for that very, very talented advisor. Secondarily, you'll need a permit from the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio will not proceed without you having a federal permit in hand. But because government moves slowly, sometimes on several levels, we always recommend that you begin the process of the state and federal permitting process at the same time, so that the minute you have your federal permit in hand, you can go and to Columbus, drop off in Columbus, mail to Columbus your application for Ohio. The agency that regulates us is the Ohio Department of Commerce. Under that, the Ohio Division of Liquor Control, and the link is there in front of you. Again, if you need, bail through things as you can, but if you need professional help, we have a couple of lawyers with whom we work who are highly respected by the Division of Liquor Control who can help you get through things. You're going to be looking at a number of permits that are extremely inexpensive. The A2 permit is the general winery permit. This is applicable for people who manufacture, and it is a manufacturing permit, winery or cider. On the federal level, sometimes cider is considered wine. In other states, it's considered beer. In Ohio, cider permit is the same as the winery permit, and it's only $76 a year. If you are growing your grapes and you want to identify yourself as an agricultural entity, we always recommend that you look at the A2F permit. There are no stringent requirements as to how many grapes you need to grow, but it's important, as we'll emphasize throughout this series, that you're authentic. So 1 or 2 vines in your front yard would not provide you the opportunity, I would not think, at least from a consumer perspective, to go after the A2F. If you have a visible vineyard, then an A2F may be the option. Again, same cost, $76. While you're getting those permits, even if you don't think you're going to use them, we always recommend that you always get what's called an S1 permit. In order to ship wine from your winery to a consumer, you need to have this permit, and it doesn't take very long for a couple bottles of wine for some neighbor who lives in Wapakoneta or who lives in Conneaut or who lives in Toledo, who wants to send a couple bottles of wine to someone for a birthday in another part of the state to recoup that investment in that permit. It's only $25. So I would suggest always you get the $25 S1 permit. In addition, we always recommend that you spend another $25 and get a B2A. The B2A allows you to sell to another retailer. You may not want to go to Kroger's or Giant Eagle. Actually, we recommend you don't for a good long time. But there may be a neighbor carryout who's interested in carrying a few bottles of your wine. You need to have this permit so that they are allowed to sell it. So you sell it to them at a specified price level. And this is only $25. The good thing about that is you may be closed on Sunday, they'll be open on Sunday. You may be closed at 8 o'clock at night and someone's on their way to a dinner party at 9:30 and wants to grab a bottle of your wine. So we always recommend this B2A. The final permit that you'll likely consider, or some of you at least will consider down the road, is when your business grows and there is a consumer demand for beer or spirits. People would like those options beyond just wine. There is something called an A1A permit. And that A1A permit is available to anybody who has an A2 or an A2F. It's $3,900 a year, so you've got to sell a lot of beer. But a number of wineries, especially those who do weddings, are using this permit. There are a series of other requirements with this. It's just not the permit. You have to meet a lot of additional requirements. So that'll be something we'll talk about down the road. The state has been slow. There's a lot of transition. There's always transition when there are change of administration, change of personnel. And so make sure your state application is in place right away. In addition, in the old days, there were 3 or 4 inspectors. When they were there, they called them the wine 9. There were 9 of them. Now, what the state has done is cross-train all of the liquor inspectors, be their beer, be their warehouse. Everybody is doing everything because there's so many wineries, over 400 wineries, over 400 breweries. So a lot of the new inspectors are not fully abreast with some of the nuances. So our recommendation is when they come to visit you for inspection, and they will inspect you only after you're ready to go. You have to have all your equipment in place, your building set. Make sure that any communication you have with them is always in writing to protect yourself. In other words, we want to make sure that you understand what they are sharing with you, and should there be a question, you'll have that to use as documentation. Again, you have to be inspected by the state, but your building and equipment has to be in place and have final approval before you can open. In addition, make sure that when you outline the parameters of your permit, you include a large enough area to allow for expansion. In other words, if you are in a rural setting and you have a tasting room that seats 45 people, make sure that you include some of the grounds around your winery as a part of that permit so that you'll be able to put some picnic tables outside. You're going to have an awful lot to deal with local zoning, with health departments, with building codes. There are some agricultural exemptions we'll talk about down the road in another one of these pieces. Agriculture, health and safety requirements. There are a lot of folks that you need to communicate with and meet approval from before you'll be able to open your doors. And again, make sure everything is in writing. Food service. Lots of folks indicate that they don't want to bother with food service. It requires lots of extra it requires lots of extra equipment. It requires extra licensure. In some cases, it requires some certifications. But food is important. You do not want to be in a situation where you're serving lots of alcohol without providing some food. So there are some options that you consider if you don't want to go through your local health department. And the local health department will dictate and test your sewer, your water, your sanitation, the number of sinks, the number of restrooms you have. You have to make sure you're complying because the local health department can shut you down quicker than nearly anything else for violations. So make sure that you know your local health department and make sure that you say, ask in advance, what do I need? And then comply. If you're on a well, if you're on a sewer, there are all kinds of extra requirements. If you're on city water and if you're on sanitation sewers, I'm sorry, if you're on a septic tank, there's all kinds of issues. If you're on city water and sanitation sewers, things are a lot easier. In addition, the Department of Agriculture has some inspection authority for health and safety. So if you want to do food, there are several ways to approach it. You can bring in food trucks. However, if you do bring in food trucks for specified hours, they will not work with that A1A I talked about in the last slide. And A1A requires continual hot food. So you can bring in food trucks, you can bring in a caterer, you can have people call in and have food delivered, or there are a couple of options. One winery in Valley View talked to me about their hot dog. Those hot dog wagons that you see on the corner of city streets are considered a certified kitchen. So for about $4,000, you can buy one of those and begin with that as a brats and kind of simple food that you can serve at your winery without a whole lot of capital investment. In addition, I keep talking about this go-kart track that we have, and we've learned there that there are several levels of food service. But even we have a ventless fryer, we have a little cooker, we make a little bit of pizza. Even those little bit of snack foods that we have require that we get a full service restaurant license. So make sure when you talk with your health department, you know what the criteria are. However, our General Assembly, our friends in the General Assembly a year or so ago, offered the opportunity to provide food service under certain circumstances without a license. Based on the 2021-22 legislation, you can avoid a food service license if you produce 10,000 gallons or less of wine, if you, in writing, notify the Ohio Department of Agriculture that you plan to take advantage of this exemption. It has to be documented, and I would send that in by certified mail. You need to sell only food that is commercially prepackaged and sealed. You cannot open a package of cheese, put it on a cutting board because it was originally unsealed. It has to be sealed when you serve it to the consumer. Somewhere in a prominent place in your tasting room, you have to post a document that says that you do not need to get a typical food service license, that you are exempt. And you need to indicate on your paperwork that the food sales will be less than 5% of your gross. A number of wineries have done this. There are, Adams Reserve Cheese has these beautiful cracker cuts. There are a number of charcuterie board type packages that are sold by various food service companies. So if anybody is interested in some of those sources, call the office. We'll try and help connect you with some folks that can provide the kinds of things you need. There is one other exemption that several of our wineries are using. It's a little bit tricky, it's a little bit controversial, and it may put you at odds with your local zoning inspectors. So you need to be very careful if you use it. But the Ohio Revised Code is noted here, and it says the owner of an occupied home can serve up to 115 meals per week on its premises. If a notice is conspicuously posted, informing guests that a food service license is not required. This is dubbed the Amish exemption, so that the Amish families serve in their homes. But the important thing is that you have to live in the house and it has to be served on your premises. Labels. When you get ready to open your winery, you need to make sure that the labels that you have selected for your wine have been created with a great deal of thought. I would strongly suggest you do not work with a talented artist and a local printer to design these things. You may want to find a talented local artist or a family member who can create an image for you, a look for you. But once that basic look has been created, I would strongly recommend that you go to a reputable label company. There are a number of them on our website. In the long run, it'll save you time, it'll save you money, because the feds are very specific about a number of things on that label, on where type size is involved, where certain information is located, and you need to make sure that the stock that they use is appropriate for the wine bottle. You don't want something that will float off immediately if you're putting that wine bottle in a tub of water during a festival. And I cannot emphasize how important it is. If Aunt Tilly or Cousin Joe designs that label and it looks amateurish, you are in competition with a whole lot of talented wineries, a whole lot of wine in that wine lake, and you want to make sure that label, which reflects who you are when you're not there to tell your story to the consuming public, that label is incredibly important. Once you get the label designed, and it's designed with the circumstances and requirements of the federal government, it needs to be submitted to the federal government. Right now, there's no charge, and you must do it online. It's called a COLA, and there is the link on this slide for the COLA. Once you get the label approved, you must register with the state. They typically will turn around and accept whatever the feds approve, but they do charge you $50 a label for state approval. So if you have 60 labels, that's a lot. If you have 10 labels, you're still looking at $500. The state is currently working on some online label approvals. As of this recording, had not been completed, but I will recommend strongly that you do everything online, because once you get into the system, if there is an error and they kick it back and you respond quickly, you remain at the top of the pile. The federal government reviews about 500,000 labels a year from all of the alcohol producers, and they only have 7 or 8 or maybe 10 people working in that office. So it's critical that you stay on the top of that pile. So once you get a label approval, move forward. If they kick it back to you and ask you to make corrections, make them quickly. What you need to do on your label is have an appellation of origin, if you have one. In other words, it can be Ohio River Valley, it can be Grand River Valley, it can be Napa Valley, or it can be the state of Ohio or Clark County. You need to have a brand name. And by the way, the appellation of origin is required. We'll talk about that later on. But if you're going to do estate wines, you have to have a geographic appellation. There are a number of requirements. And again, a professional label company will help you deal with that. You'll need your brand name, and you'll need the type or class of designation. Are you table wine? Are you sparkling wine? Are you fortified wine? And if you are bringing wine in from a foreign country, you have to have that noted. That is not the case generally for Ohio. Required will be the alcohol content. Any color ingredients. In other words, if you are adding color, or other than from natural fruits, if you're adding color to intensify the look of the bottle in the glass, you'll need to include that. There needs to be a health warning statement. There need to be the net contents by volume, and there needs to be a sulfite declaration. Coming very soon, probably in 2023, maybe early 24, there also will be the requirement coming now for some kind of health or caloric content. Wine America, the national organization, is working on this ingredient labeling dilemma, because it can be a dilemma for our industry, given vintages and variations and the need to print quantities of labels based on what's in your tanks. It's going to be a complicated deal, so we'll need to watch closely when ingredient labeling requirements come to be. There are a series of other label considerations. First of all, TTB has a pretty user-friendly site. And the COLA link is cited here. Again, if you have trouble with this, talk to your label designer. There are some considerations when you are producing a non-traditional wine name. For example, the example I'll give you is raspberry Riesling. There is no designation for raspberry Riesling. In order to get that label approved for distribution across state lines, it would be virtually impossible. But you can take that raspberry Riesling, apply for a for sale in Ohio only option, and make sure that's only sold within the state. The difficulty is if you ship it around, if you decide your neighboring state wants to carry out, your neighboring state wants to carry your wine, it creates all kinds of havoc. So be very, very careful with that. An appellation is a geographic area like Napa Valley, like Ohio River Valley, like Lake Erie, like Grand River Valley, like the coming Conneaut Creek. It is a federally designated area that is acquired through a complicated application process. Vintage, you can include the vintage, which is always the year in which the grapes are picked. We had an odd circumstance in 20 and 21 where some of the wineries picked ice wine in December, but it got warm, so they didn't pick the second batch until January. So in that single harvest, they had 2 vintages for that single ice wine. If you are going to put a varietal designation, Chardonnay, Vidal Blanc, on your label, 75% of the liquid in that bottle must come from that grape variety. For Nebraskas like Concord and Niagara and Catawba, only 51%. If you are going to note it as table wine, and table wine is taxed much lower than some of the fortified and sparkling wines, the alcohol content must not exceed 16%. Again, thanks to Wine America, they moved the 14%, which had been in place probably since Prohibition, to 16% this last year to accommodate the bigger reds and the hotter wines that are being produced in climate change. If you want to call your wine estate grown, it is critical, essential, that you have a federally designated geographic AVA. You cannot have an estate grown Ohio wine. It has to be an estate grown Grand River Valley, estate grown Ohio River Valley, estate grown Lake Erie, estate grown Isle of St. George. You need to make sure that estate grown wines has a federal designation, and it has to be 100% control from grape to glass. Sometimes winemakers will use the phrase reserve. There are no federal designations as to what reserve is. Typically, in the consumer's mind, it means that only about 10% of the production from that variety is in that bottle. So it's sort of special. Blends are allowed, but we also always encourage people to post percentages if they so choose. The back labels are very important. I'm a big fan of storytelling. People like to know what's going on in your winery's family, in your winery's history, how you came to be, what kind of grapes you're using. Those stories are very good uses on the back label. You also must include sulfite and health warnings, and almost without exception, the wineries put those on the back label. I'm guessing that when ingredient labeling comes, it will go on the back label too. There is a movement to try and get all of these things consolidated into a QR code. I don't know if the feds are going to allow it. In Great Britain, they now allow the QR code in lieu of these sulfite, health, and ingredient label warnings. We'll see where that goes. Type sizes are very important. I can't tell you how many new wineries back 15 or 20 years ago, before there was, many of them had sources of information to collect or ask, how many times the labels came back because they were the wrong type size. And just as a suggestion, the International Riesling Federation recommends that all of us use this Riesling scale. You can use this sweetness scale for every variety, obviously, but it helps the consumer understand what they will be buying if your wine is going onto a grocery store shelf. This is a relatively short video. We're going to have another full video on the details of reporting, both the state and federal, but there's an awful lot that needs to be researched from just this piece, from both TTB and from the state. So I'll have you, we'll deal with the rest of the labeling and reporting issues on another video. Thank you.